Hi and welcome to my channel. So I have recently read Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I've got a lot of things to say about this book. Now, first of all, this book has some topics and ideas that are worth discussing in my opinion. And second of all, let's talk about the weird ending, because I do have a theory that might explain the events. I'm not saying that I'm correct, I'm just saying that it might explain it at least a little bit. Because if I read one more review how the ending was just underwhelming and weird, I'm gonna lose my mind, okay? So let's talk about this. Obviously, this video will contain a lot of spoilers, so if you haven't read it, I suggest you to read it and then come back and let's talk about it. Obviously, I did love the book. I gave it 5 stars, and I usually don't give books 5 stars, so that's something, I guess. One thing that I've struggled with a little bit was that because we get to know the world through the eyes of a robot, a very childlike, naive robot, it was sometimes frustrating to not really understand what the different terms means. But on the other hand, it actually made me read more. And yeah, let's just dive right into it. So the book starts with Klara in the store, who is an AF. That is short for artificial friend, and she is basically a robot for kids, which I thought was very interesting. So what these robots do is basically, well, they are friends to kids, particularly very rich kids, I assume. And we also learned that the sun is very important to the robots. Now, I'm not sure if it was really mentioned there. It was kind of hinted that the robots might be partially powered by solar energy, so they were basically programmed to always stay in the sun and look into the sun, which kind of resulted in the robots just almost worshipping the sun. And I think even Klara herself kind of referred to the sun as almost like a god, because she would always say like, oh, he has the power to help others. We kind of learned that from the get-go when Klara believes that the beggar man and his dog were resurrected by the powerful sun, and she kind of believes that the sun can heal everyone. Like I said, I think it's because the robots are partially powered by solar energy, but I'm not sure if it was really mentioned like specifically in the book or not. So then we meet Josie and her mom, and Klara describes the mom as someone who is wearing a high-ranking office uniform. So at first I was kind of confused because I was like, wait, is everybody like working in the same company? But to me it seems like everything is just controlled by this entity, probably the government, and everybody has to wear uniforms based on their ranks, which I think is very kind of chilling if you think about it, because you can tell just from the clothes where this person stands in the society. I guess we already kind of have that in the present world with luxurious brands, and if you have a trained eye you can spot wealth right away. Then Josie picks Klara up after like few weeks or something, and we go into her household where we meet Melania, the housekeeper. And I liked her character, especially towards the end, because she seemed to be the really sensible one in the story, as well as Rick, but I'll talk about him later. So we learned that Josie is actually sick, and we are not really sure like what is the cause of her sickness until the very end of the book, but it is very heavily implied that it was because of her being lifted. And this is probably just the most chilling thing about this novel. So when a baby is born, the parents can decide if they want them to be lifted or not. And by lifted, it means to genetically modify them to be more intelligent. And only lifted kids basically have a chance to get a higher education and have a chance at better life. But it comes with a price, because sometimes it doesn't work out and the kids can die. Now, I think we didn't really learn about the odds of the kid dying, but based on the fact that Sel, Josie's sister, also died for that reason, I'm assuming it might be, I don't know, I'm guessing like 50%, maybe like 40-60%, something like that. Now, I wish this was explained in the book further, but I was really wondering if Josie's mom was lifted or if Rick's mom was lifted. I'm kind of assuming they were, especially Josie's mom and her dad. Like 100%, considering the fact that they wore the high-ranking office uniforms and they studied something in a university. At first I thought that it seems pretty, I don't want to say stupid, but just very unwise to have that in a society. Maybe when they first started the process, because it's not really implied when they did that, but I'm assuming it kind of happened for a longer time. So I was thinking that at first, you know, they genetically modified the kids and there were pretty much no issues, but then these genetically modified kids also started having kids, and probably they were more prone to also lift their kids as well, because they also wanted to give them a better life. And then you constantly have these genetically modified kids until it actually starts to be really problematic health-wise, which is what happened with Josie and Sel, actually. But that's just my theory. Obviously, I don't know if the author meant it in that way, but it made me think, because I thought that it was pretty silly to even start doing this if the complications were so high, because it made me think how that would be socially unacceptable, like from the get-go. But as time progressed, like people became accustomed to it and they don't really see as many issues with it. I just think the whole idea is just very sinister and chilling. Like basically you're risking your child's life in order to give them a better life. I imagine myself living in that society. What would I do if I was in a position like that? Like, would I lift my child? Like, would it be more socially acceptable if the health risks were so bad? Would that change my judgment? Because obviously I wouldn't go through with it with my child in today's age, but it really makes you think how like ethics can be skewed over time. You know, a lot of things that were unacceptable in the past are acceptable now. So some things that we, as of today, we see as unacceptable and horrifying might be really acceptable in the future. Let's move on from this topic. So we also meet Rick's mom, and I think it's so interesting how she was painted as this crazy lady just because she didn't want her kid to be genetically modified, which really makes you think about, like, again, the ethics like I talked about, but I'm not gonna talk about them anymore. And we learned that she really wanted to give her son a chance at a better education anyway, because we learned that one last university accepts very few unlifted kids as well. But as we know, that didn't happen in the end, and I'm gonna be honest, I was really sad. I guess it is realistic that it wouldn't happen, but still, I was really disappointed for Rick. Oh, let's talk about Sel for a little bit, the Josie's sister. So she was also lifted and she died, and we learned that Josie's mother also tried to make an AF that would at least resemble Sel. And I think it's heavily implied that she actually like went through with it, but because she didn't have an AF that would actually observe her, I think she just only had an AF that looked like Sel, but that didn't act like Sel. And Rick's mother mentions that she saw Josie's mother and Sel fighting in the fields, even though Sel is supposed to be dead already. And then it's pretty much never mentioned again. And Rick's mother implies that Sel has been actually living in the house this whole time. But I don't think it was Sel who was living in it. I truly believe that Sel's AF was in the house the whole time. Now, where would this AF be? Well, in the end we learned that Klara went to the utility room and she discovered it for the first time. She was never there before, and I wholeheartedly believe that Sel's AF was stored in the utility room this whole time. Now, where that AF went in the end, we'll talk about that at the end, okay? So we meet Mr. Capaldi, and Melania housekeeper warns Klara because she knows what's up. I'm assuming she even might know that Sel's AF actually is living in the house. She's a housekeeper, she probably knows everything. And I wish she would tell it like to Klara like more specifically, because Klara was in the dark for a very long time, and so the reader was also in the dark for a very long time. So that's when we learned that Klara is supposed to observe Josie and then basically become her after, and she would almost wear Josie's skin that Mr. Capaldi made, which that scene was just so terrifying. I had goosebumps all over when Klara went and meets the AF in preparation to become Josie. No, I really didn't like that scene. So I already talked about how Josie's mother wanted an AF to resemble Josie and who would act like Josie after she died. And there comes this question like, is there something as a soul? Like, what makes a person unique? Because even today, like, there's so many algorithms that tailor to our desires and that they kind of pretend to really know us. And it kind of makes you think like, oh, can we actually imitate a person? Like, can he be only summed up in just a bunch of algorithms? And we learn in the end that, well, no, but again, I'll get to that. And we also learn that the father really is against this idea that, you know, Josie is supposed to be continued after her death. Klara and Josie's father team up to destroy one of these coding machines. That's how Klara calls them. I was thinking that the coding machines might be something like a chimney of a factory, like something similar like that. And we learned that Klara has made a deal with the sun to destroy this machine so that Josie could get better, which obviously doesn't make a lot of sense, and Josie's father knows that. Despite that, he tells Klara that he just needs to extract some liquid from her brain to destroy this machine, which I'm not even sure if I really believed him. It might have been true, it might have been not, but it was very, very convenient for him. And Klara gets damaged. I think a lot of people kind of overlooked how badly damaged she actually was because, well, she started to not notice details anymore. The skin of people around her started to seem very unnatural, like with no wrinkles. She started to not recognize certain voices. And she also described a person as like two funnels or something. Like, she was really, really badly damaged. And from this point on, I think that she is not a reliable narrator anymore. She's just not. And I think that a lot of things just went under her radar. She was basically malfunctioning, and it really broke my heart when that happened because Klara was so naive and trusting and childlike, and I think that, well, she was programmed to be that way because she is supposed to be a friend to children, but still, I was very sad when that happened. After that, Josie's health gets worse and she is basically dying. You can see that she is not well and she probably won't be recovered. And that's when Klara goes to the barn where she was meeting the son and starts to plead with him because she wants Josie to be healthy and she truly believes that the son will listen to her. And you can see that she is not okay. Like, she is hallucinating. She just starts seeing like different memories. They kind of blend together. Like I said, she is not a reliable narrator anymore. And she goes back and Josie's mother has this really, really weird conversation with Rick. And that's when I have lost all respect for her because she's just like, do you think you've won? Like, your price is a little, like, you didn't gamble with your life. Do you think you're a winner? Like, I'm sorry, I really wanted to slap Josie's mom. This conversation just really, really made me mad. One thing that I found really odd was that Josie's mother was already wearing black. And it's almost like she lost all hope. And then we go to Josie's room and the sun shines on her and suddenly she gets regenerated and she gets better and she grows up and becomes an adult. And I'm gonna be honest, I thought it was so weird at first. Well, because it is, but this is where my theory comes in. So after that moment, just one weird thing started to happen after another. For example, she no longer cares about her plan with Rick. She even stops talking to Rick altogether. Josie's father stops visiting her, which I found really odd, because you could see how he actually loved her, even though he wasn't really seeing her a lot. But I think that was because of the crazy mother. But I digress. But after that, I think he only meets her once in like all those years until she becomes an adult. And we also get a weird conversation with Mr. Capaldi because Josie's mother is really mad at him. And he's just like, well, don't be mad at me. Like, it was your idea. Which, again, very suspicious. He even tells her like, I just did my best to help you. Now another weird thing is that Josie literally stops caring for Klara altogether. And you may think like, oh, it's just a teenager, but you gotta remember Klara was very important to Josie before. Even if she grew up, like, I don't think she would just treat Klara that way. And another thing is Rick questioning Klara because he's like, that day when Josie suddenly got better, was there all there was to it? Like, what actually happened? And Klara kind of says like, oh, I can't really talk about it. But like I said, Klara is very damaged, which, let's talk about my theory that would explain all of these weird stuff. So, I actually believe that Josie did in fact die. And since Mr. Capaldi already had all of Klara's data, he didn't really need her anymore. I think that mother could kind of tell that Klara was damaged already, so she couldn't really use her to become Josie. Now, what AF became Josie? I believe that the Sel's AF actually was given a new skin and a new data, and she became the continuation of Josie. Now, one thing that doesn't make sense in my theory is growing up, obviously. Like, if Josie was now an AF, she wouldn't grow up. But it's mentioned that Josie goes away for days at a time to go to like interaction meetings, but was there like all to it? Like, didn't she just go to Mr. Capaldi again to get remodeled, for example? That's, I don't know, maybe I'm just stretching this, but who knows? I don't know if the author actually meant it that way. And also Melania Housekeeper is no longer there, probably because, well, she realized what actually happened and she definitely did not agree with the plan, just like the father. So I don't know if it was just a mere coincidence that the people who were really against the replacement of Josie suddenly just started to disappear, but I don't know, obviously. And in the last scene, when Klara is talking to the manager, she says something along the lines of, I don't think I would do a good job with the continuation of Josie, because it wasn't just about impersonation of Josie, but also about the people that loved her, past tense. And it kind of explains why like Josie's father no longer visited her, or why Rick stopped talking to her, because, well, she wasn't Josie. It was somebody who looked like Josie, that behaved like Josie, but it wasn't an actual Josie, because she was now a robot that only acted like her. Now, one last thing that kind of supports my theory is when the sun shines on Josie and suddenly she feels energetic and healthy, and who is powered by solar energy partially. AFs. Now, obviously, this is just a theory. I might be really wrong, but like I said, it would explain a lot of weird stuff that happened in the end. And it would kind of make sense for Klara actually to not notice that Josie was switched at some point, because she was no longer the reliable narrator. And one thing that I found kind of sad was how Josie's mother was against Mr. Capaldi and his experiments because he basically wanted to de-engineer her, something like that. He mentioned it like that. And in the end, Klara ends up in the junkyard. And I found it kind of odd because the mother says something along the lines of like, oh, like you cannot experiment on her. She deserves her slow fade. So it made me think like how many years actually have passed before Klara was thrown out. Like I'd like to think that a lot of years passed, but I'm not sure obviously. And I'm gonna be honest, I finished the book and I just sat there in silence for a couple of minutes. And then I just started bawling my eyes out because I felt so bad for Klara. You know, she was such a good naive robot and she just didn't deserve to be thrown out, but we learned that eventually all AFs are thrown out into this junkyard, which was sad and I felt really bad. We kind of learned that people started to be really scared of AFs or robots in general. And it kind of would make sense, like if suddenly you can have an AF just impersonating a human, that's when real problems come in. Now overall, I really did enjoy the story. I think it raised some really important questions. I've heard that the author himself is pro artificial intelligence if we use it wisely. I thought that the whole caste system with lifted kids was very, very well done and really chilling because it makes you think like we kind of already have a technology to actually do that. I feel kind of sad that a lot of people are underestimating this book. Like I said, I do believe my theory, but obviously I don't know if it's true. And if my theory wasn't in fact true, I probably would agree with all those people who would say that it was underwhelming. But I digress. I feel like there was a lot of details mentioned that you might not pick up as you're reading it. And I've read it as an audiobook. I was just listening to it. I couldn't really put it down. And so I have listened to the entire book in like almost like one big chunk, like over a few days. So I have noticed a lot of really, really small details in the book. And I still feel like I have probably missed a ton of details. So I would actually love to reread it one day and kind of look for different clues and see if I was actually right in my theory or not. Obviously, I love this book. I will definitely be reading more of this author's books in the future. That's it for today's video. I hope you have enjoyed it and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.